We in the mix. So, do you hear me? And do you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, sir.
So, how was your day today?
It was good. Busy, but
Yeah.
good. Can't complain. At least still got a job. Praise the Lord.
Good job.
Mm-hmm.
Did they allow you to continue to work?
Yeah, we just work from home because we still have to support the field. So and then we help out with HR where we can because a lot of my projects got stopped except for the Google glasses
Okay.
that we're going to use for maintenance and troubleshooting.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay. What's up, Miss Shonda? How are you? Hello, Loretta. How are you doing?
Hey, ladies.
Wow. So I guess last time you and I had a conversation, Mrs. Brenda, was what, 2 weeks ago? Maybe 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago.
And I did not title this particular conversation. I don't know. I wanted to. I thought it was necessary to do so. But I don't do the used car salesman release stuff. You know? Hey, we're selling cars for $24.99.
Okay.
But I wanted to just kind of spend about an hour, just an hour, maybe a little less, talking about a series of conversations that I want to have as it relates to just the cult experience, the impact.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people talk about a cult, or they claim or make suggestions that, you know, you're in a cult, or, you know, they know what a cult is, or they use that word loosely. But I'm learning to understand that it's more to it than just saying it's a cult. You have to really understand the impact of that. And I think you are you've given me some insight, some information that I think that is necessary to talk about. I want to talk to you about some of the things that you're studying, some of the things that you know, your experiences, as well as my experience, because a lot of people don't understand what a cult really is.
Right. In the Black community.
Right. And especially us, you know, we automatically look for, you know, the hair braided up on one side of the head. We look for, you know, spaceships to show up in the sky. We land on the bed with our Nikes on. You know, we drinking lemonade. We got AR-15s. Well, those are the most popular, most common things that we can identify with. But there are some behavioral practices. There are some things that people need to understand. And also, most importantly, how to exit, how to heal, and how to continue living your life, right?
Yeah, because a lot of people don't really understand that it's not just just get up and leave.
Right.
You know, so
what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? What is a cult?
Well, so you have two different schools of thought, because you have those that can say, well, any group can be a cult, right? No, that's not true. A cult is when you have a group, but now you are not able to independently think. You're not allowed to operate individualistically. Your individualism is traded for the group identity.
Okay.
And everything you do has to be about that cult. You have to take on their beliefs. You have to have the friends that they say you can have. And usually they are kind of like your family as well. That's when we begin to take on a cult, when a person begins to lose their freedom, right? And they face ostracism, they face criticism, they face rejection if they do anything contrary to the cult.
Well, I guess, how do you even get to that place? Is it something that goes on with individuals that kind of lead them to that place first? What, can you walk me through some of those steps?
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of times there's a thing in psychology called maladaptive behaviors. There's 18 of them.
Say
Okay.
it. It's called what?
Maladaptive behaviors. They're called they're called maladaptive schemas, actually. There's 18 of them. And what happens is these maladaptive schemas form in your childhood. So when you are a child, if you don't get the things that you need from your parents or from somebody who is significant in your life during those formative years, you begin to form maladaptive behaviors in which you can have three coping mechanisms associated with. So you can either be avoidant, you could be overcompensating, or you could surrender. Okay. And so what happens a lot of times is when that happens, as you begin to grow up, that one situation that happened that caused you trauma, you begin to repeat living that pattern, choosing those people. So if you have, say, rejection issues or the abandonment issues, that maybe happen from your father or your mother, right? Or a grandparent or whatever. You may find that as you grew up in life and as you became an adult, you found yourself attracted to certain people that reinforced those abandonment issues. But that is because that's what you're attracted to.
Okay.
Because now that's your schema. That's if you think it's just your personality, it's not. And so a lot of times that can leave you susceptible to gravitating towards certain personality types, certain charismatic leaders that end up being, tyrants and stuff like that. Or like if you have already had subjugation issues where maybe when you were growing up, you weren't affirmed by your parents, and maybe they were very controlling. Maybe they never affirmed your decision making. So you always feel like you don't have a voice, even though you do. But in your mind, you don't have a voice. So therefore, you'll put your wants, your needs, your desires down in order to do what they say in order to get acceptance, because you don't want to be rejected. So that carries with you, and then you'll begin to see a pattern in all of your relationships where you play this subjugated role to possibly dominant people, or you may marry somebody who's more subjugated than you, so that way you can feel dominant.
Wow. So, I think a lot of times we misunderstand how these things really impact us, right? Mm-hmm. I can go back, I would say about 2005, mm-hmm. where I was involved in a ministry, and on the front end of the ministry, everything was wonderful. A lot of love bombing.
Yep.
We had great time. The pastor would come to the house. Mm-hmm. Anything you need, they made it available to you. Mm-hmm. But what I started realizing is that there was this, what you would call a vortex, or a circular movement of cliques, mm-hmm. and opinions and ideas, and mm-hmm. And then next thing you know, you had to listen to only this person.
Yep.
And everybody on base or everybody around us was wrong.
Yep.
The church was a very progressive church. The pastor was young. But what I started really seeing is, this exclusivity.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to post and share in the chat so people can understand, we want to be able to identify some of these things.
Yeah.
Tip portion is very important to express. It is. Let's look at this. Exclusivity. They are the only or ark of salvation. You can leave and be saved, but breaking up is hard to do. Let's talk about that. Number one.
Yeah. So it's kind of like when you have an abusive partner, right? It's like that partner will make you feel like, oh, I'm doing you a favor. It should be an honor that I let you in, right? And that's how these groups are. It's like the exclusivity, the elitism, and for a person that is that has certain susceptibilities, or there's outside things going on where there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of vulnerability, that is like just aiding that feeling of exclusivity gives them comfort. It gives them security.
Right.
So, and it gives them some value. So if you are a person, and especially like you just said, you said the pastor was young and different things, that's a life transition phase where a lot of people are susceptible. So you have like maybe your kids are leaving, or maybe you're young, or maybe you have just left the house and just got married and just starting your family, major transitions in life, right? And they have this exclusivity. When you, before that, you already were trying to find out what your identity is, but then this exclusivity makes you feel like I have an identity. I found my place finally, right?
Yeah. And so is that familiar to you when you had your experience?
I felt like it in other areas, and the only reason why is because I had a different coping mechanism. So it wasn't necessarily to surrender as much as it was avoidance. So so it's like, I'll deal with you, but not close enough to where you can get in on my personal stuff. You get what I'm saying? But I did have, like Bobby, he had that. And it was like, of course, this pride, right, that you kind of get from being in the group, you know, so to speak. And so watching that, it was just like, really? This group right here? You talking about this group?
Yeah.
And I've seen it. I've seen it in other places, and it's just like, I get it, because depending on what you've been through, and unfortunately in the Black church, we over spiritualize a lot of things, and we don't look at just the natural susceptibility that comes with being human.
Absolutely.
You know?
I have another one. This is a really, really good one. This one deals with elitism. Elitism. Let's talk about the elitism.
So that's us versus them, right? So we're the ones with the knowledge. We're the ones who have, the easy pass into their pearly gates of heaven. You know, I'm on top of the security bouncers list. You know, when I go and I die and go up to heaven, I get to go straight to the VIP section in heaven, right? And everybody else who doesn't believe, who doesn't have this knowledge, this rare knowledge, they're not worthy. They're devalued, right? So you feel this, like when you get that acceptance into this elite group, you feel elite, and so now you become prideful.
That's interesting, because what you would hear in most situations, and I think in the terms going back to my experience in 2006, it was almost as if the pastor or the church or the organization was, we're the only ones preaching truth. We are the only ones that are seeing the revelation. We hold the keys. We have all the insight. We pray more. We fast more. We're the greatest church here in this particular country of Japan that I was living in. It was really, really fascinating, because you begin to take on that mantra, like, well, man, we're better. We got more revelation.
You ain't up on this.
We got more access to YouTube than you do.
Right. Yes. And then you just start to get real critical, real snooty, real self-righteous.
Right.
And by the way, can't nobody tell you nothing.
And we have some kind of way of experience that. Many levels. Here's what I was picking on. It's quite a few, because I know you got some amazing slides that you want to get to, and some things you want to talk about from a psychiatrist standpoint. But here's one that I thought was really good. Let's take a look at this one. This one here, most people kind of overlook. Information control. They decide what you should know and believe, and you are not free to read or listen to other sources.
Yeah.
Let's
Because
talk about
the way that your critical thinking
it.
is disarmed.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying? Because if you read other information that is contrary to what they have, then that creates a threat. And then you're going to start to critically think. And then you may just disagree, or you may just find out the truth. So they have to control information. If you think about it, right? I think it was historically speaking back with the Catholic Church for a while, because Bibles and stuff weren't printed out in mass and different things like that. They would try to control, how people had access to the Bible. And a lot of people couldn't read. So, and of course, you've seen that even like, with slavery and different things like that. So that information control, anytime you have that word control in there, in any type of relationship, it is probably about to take on the form of a toxic relationship.
But you know what's fascinating? It's like in certain situations, you feel like you are this special, unique group of people. Mm-hmm. A house on the hill. Mm-hmm. I am this exclusive church. I am this exclusive organization, and I'm better. We're better than because we have the absolute truth. No one is doing it the way we're doing it. But the really crazy part about that is it's almost an instant brainwash.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you surrender to that feeling. That feeling.
It's like a high, like a drug, right?
Yes, it's like a high. And it's better to feel that feeling than to have to critically think, because critically thinking takes work.
Let's look at this number 4. I think this one will probably resonate with our audience here and on the Facebook land, on the Facebook.
On the book.
This one here is talking about submission. Mm-hmm. I'll let you take a stab at that one.
Yeah, submission to the leader and group is required. Usually a special title must be used when addressing the leader. Yeah, so that submission is the handing over of your identity. That is you surrendering.
Okay.
Because you have to and when you're in a cult, there is no room for individuality. None whatsoever. So you need to hand over your individual thought, your psychological making, your personality and personhood, right? And you need to take on the group identity. And in order to do that, you have to surrender. There's an exchange. You have to submit. So during that, then it's like that process of that, when they're brainwashing you, when they're love bombing you and all of those things, that's the time in which you end up handing it over, because you're like, these people love me.
They love me. I've traveled. I've come from all the way from Montana.
Yes.
To hear nothing but the truth.
Yes. Yes. And then they've told you that this is, the way to salvation, and you don't want to be lost, do you? So when you take all of those different factors, that's how it gets you to submit, because now you feel like, you know what? I can trust them, and I don't want to be lost.
Right.
I don't want to be lost.
Right. And look, and if you all have any questions or any feedback, please do not hesitate. Let us know, because I think this is very important for us to have this three-way conversation where myself and Miss Brenda, who's soon to have her doctorate degree, having this intellectual dialogue. But we want to make sure that there's some participation, and because there are people who really need help, and they really need to understand what they're being impacted with. And so I want to talk a little bit about the mystical ministry. This is called the mystical ministry, where the leader and sometimes other followers claim special insight from God, right? That is not made available to others. This is used to intimidate and manipulate people into conformity. Now, I had a pastor do this to me. He said, well, brother, him and his wife, they tag teamed me. One came up and said, I had this dream. The Lord revealed something to me.
Not the dreams.
Right? And what was really interesting, at the time, I'm just like, what? And it was so off. But me looking at this gentleman, knowing that he's the pastor, knowing that, he's the leader, he's the under shepherd. These are the things that God is dealing with him concerning me. I said, okay. So he shared this dream, and I'm sitting back like, what? Then the wife will come 3 days later and she'll have a prophetic word, and I just be like, what? At this point, I'm like, okay, God is talking to all these people about all these things.
Right.
And he's telling me something totally different. And matter of fact, what he told them, her and him, was something totally different that didn't line up with what they were talking about.
Yeah.
But it was used to intimidate and get me to conform.
And I like that. I'm glad that you brought that up and that you're doing this in the order that you're doing it, because that goes in line with submission. Unfortunately, within the Black church, we've been taught dysfunctional submission, right? And so we don't necessarily, while it's in there, we do not emphasize scriptures like test the spirits. You can tell every tree by the fruit that it bears, things like that, right? Because that was your discernment. You were already in your gift. You were discerning that that's not what God is saying. God is not going to say something totally different to you and then say something totally different to all those people, because what is that called? Confusion, in which something that's not, God's not the author of confusion, right? So, but that goes along with it, because we don't actually sit and process even the way that the Lord himself has told us to process, right? So that's how you get these people coming up with this, rare knowledge about, oh, God told me and he showed me, and showed me and he told me. I'm like, okay, great. Mute your mic. But the thing is that they tell you this stuff, and you think that if you don't do it right, you're being contentious, and you're rebellious, and I tested the spirits. The spirits said no.
You know what's interesting? I had an experience where a pastor constantly wanted to get close. And wanted to know what my struggles were. He would ask me questions, things that I just didn't want to talk to you about. And sometimes he would use this language, well, you're always inside your head. You need to get outside your head. It wasn't that I was inside my head. I didn't want you in my head.
Right.
And so when I had issues and concerns that bothered me enough, I had a father to talk to. I had somebody that I considered a mentor, because I just didn't feel comfortable sharing certain things and watching how those things were handled concerning other people.
Yep.
Right. And so what I've always said to people who ask questions about some of these things, and only based on my experiences, that you always got to keep a little place in your heart reserved.
Yes.
Because when you plug yourself into an organization or into the work under the understanding that you're doing it for the work of the ministry, you plug yourself into a system, and that system becomes your God.
Yes. And then to that point, even when you talk about the mystical, whatever, that's how they set themselves up as the God voice. Yeah. So it becomes hard for you to separate their voice from God's voice. So whatever their ideology is, whatever they believe, you think that that's God. So if they look at you in a look of disdain, you feel that God looks at you with a look of disdain. It's the same thing with kids. When they're growing up, depending on how they grew up with their parents, sometimes it could be a great just precursor to how they look at God. Right. Because a lot of times their parents' voice, and rightfully so, is God's voice. And then they have to come and know God for themselves, right? And hopefully it lines up.
But you know what's really interesting here as we talk about this? Mm-hmm. When you talk about personality types, right? Some of these things can, when look at the one here, it says isolation. Leaders or individuals could say, I encourage you to be with your families. I don't encourage separation, but passively aggressively encourage it. So you get two different streams of communication. So, for example, the group leads its followers to separate from others, families and friends in the world.
That is a psychological tactic.
Let's talk about that.
So I'll tell you, because think about it, right? The enemy, he comes as an angel of light. So he's not in full demon form yet. He comes as an angel of light. So when they're telling you, oh, it's okay for you to hang out with other people, that's angel of light form. But you got to watch their fruit. When you start trying to hang out with people and you see them kind of like look at you a certain way or try to course correct you from that, that is their fruit, right? Like we say that even in relationships, right? You got to prove it to me. Prove means action, right? So if you follow their actions, if their actions is contrary to what they just said, that's a problem. And the reason why they want you to isolate is so that way they can indoctrinate and disarm threat, because as they're giving you information, they don't want anybody else in your ear to rebuttal. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I got it.
So if I am still connected to my family and I'm joining this group and I come and I say, roses aren't really, a plant, they're fruit. And then my auntie goes, girl, let me pull this up for you. That's not what this is. And let me show you what my aunt just did. That's a threat to the ideology I just picked up. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take it back and I'm going to say, well, I did my research and you're wrong about this. Now, once you spew that out, now the rest of the group is going to start doing what? Thinking, right? So you don't want that, because that's too much friction. That's too much trouble. So isolate you and cut that off. We can keep all of that down.
Have you ever experienced a level of authoritarianism?
Oh, definitely. Bobby and I, we had a situation where, it was like, oh, you leave here. Oh, watch, you soon going to see. Just watch. You're going to see why I said you need to focus on your family and on your marriage. Actually, the problem was you, sir. You created the problem. It was you.
Wow. It's quite interesting, because there's a way to disagree, right? Or, the way we have situations set up where if you have a question, there's a concern, there's protocols, there's things that are put in place. But what I found fascinating is that most individuals that operate in this capacity, when we talk about the attributes or how to identify a cult or a cult leader, the bait and switch is just fascinating.
Yeah.
You go back and just listen to old sermons, or you listen to or recall conversations. It's almost like, I'm telling you, I have a narcissistic disorder. I am letting you know that I'm controlling you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to preach a message to kick you out so you won't come here. This church is too big and I don't want all y'all in here anyway. Yeah, it's kind of, it's a lot of psychological things going on, because it's like you have the gaslighting to make you feel like you're dumb for suspecting the things you suspect, although you do see it, and then, it's the reverse psychology, because now I'm pricking at your pride, right? Like, that's what happened to my husband, right? It was like pricking at his pride. Go then, I bet you're going to leave. And then it's like, well, I'm going to leave when I feel like leaving. Like, got him. I was going to hang on anyway. I ain't thinking about you.
Right.
Another one I suggest was fear and intimidation. Let's talk about that.
So that's dealing with punishment and reward, right? So there's a punishment for having independent thought. There's a punishment for doing anything that is contrary to what the rules of the group, the ideology of the group. Reward goes to those that are the most faithful, so they won't be put on the gauntlet. They won't be talked about. They won't be ostracized. They won't be kicked out. So those are tactics that are used, and people witness that. You see it happen to one person, and then it makes you be like, well, wait, I don't want to, I don't want to be in that. So you'll keep your stuff quiet and you'll make sure you conform. Although you have questions in your head, now that you've seen an example, because they normally make an example out of a few folk, and it's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that. So now you're consumed with the fear and intimidation, and you're scared to even have an original thought. You're scared to associate with people. You'll cut folks off when they did nothing to you. You don't even have full proof. You just heard he said, she said. That's all you heard. But because you are afraid of being the next one to be kicked out, it backs you in a corner.
Erica wanted to know, what is it, Teton, that changed your heart and caused you to leave? Well, Erica, this is 2006. Let's see. Let me go back into my prehistoric brain. What really was happening, and I say this all the time, but what really caused me to really leave and get out of Dodge is when the sexual immorality and the perversion started to surface. Mm-hmm. And so what I did, I just basically did what any young believer was doing. I got into the Word. I spent a lot of time, really isolating myself and really understanding what the Bible says about what my experience was. So I started listening and watching, and I got real quiet. And said, I was a video guy, so I was running the video ministry. Mm-hmm. So I was able to sit back and look at all the video, and I'm sitting back editing this video for the TV show, and I'm just like, wow. And so they had a prayer ministry, and we're constantly praying. And so as I got into the Word, I unplugged myself from the idea that this was the elite ministry, and this ministry had nothing but truth. Now, mind you, this is 2006. I'm in Japan. I'm away from America. I'm isolated. And as I started to unplug myself from the system and readjust my vow and plug myself back into what was true and all truth, then comes the download. Prepare your family.
Yeah.
And then these things begin to just kind of manifest. And what happened, sometimes you kind of just, I'm going to look past that. That didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to look past that. Nah, that ain't true. But when you start counting up the costs and you start looking at the impact of how it was impacting your life, your relationship with your children, family, the contradictions, or you just need to go pray. Well, how about this? I remember a moment when I was in my kitchen and the scriptures were very clear. Ezekiel had to go before the leadership, and I stood before the leadership in a meeting. It was all set up. I read what I needed to read, and I got out of there, got a phone call from the wife. She's laying me out. You come back and interpret that. And I'm like, I ain't coming to interpret nothing. Y'all pastors, I'm getting up out of here. And from that point on, it was a peace. It was freedom. And I forgave myself for being caught up in it. And I said, I'm going to keep on moving.
Yeah. Because you got the fruit out of it. Every tree by the fruit that it bears. I know that was us too. When, first and foremost, staying in line with the Word, it's because the Word is called light. So you'll be able to see certain things, right? As opposed to when you're in darkness. So there were certain things that I saw from an inconsistency standpoint, and I would be like, babe, but what about this? But what about this? And it's like, no. It was like swatting. And I was like, okay. But then it came a time where it was like the season had come for the fruit to bear, for us to see if it was good fruit or bad fruit. And when it did, it was like, go back to the Word. And as I began to, and especially him, as he began to get back into his Word, not his Word vicariously through somebody else, but him getting into his Word and not with that voice in his head, then it was like, oh, wow, wait a minute. And then you start moving accordingly, because the day you hear his voice, harden not your heart.
So I guess this conversation is really good. I want people to really just kind of process what's happening. Please, by all means, you need to really, really take the time and do your study.
Yes.
There's so much information out there.
Yeah.
So instead of looking up what Jay-Z and Beyonce is doing, what Kanye is doing, get your Bible, get those things you need to really study and know what we're experiencing, and know that there's a way out. And so I want to continue on our conversation on this last point. There's many other points we want to talk about. We'll come back tomorrow because there's a piece I want you to present and talk about some things that you wanted to share. And this last thing is leaders have no accountability. That's fascinating to me because when I think about levels of accountability based on my past experience, this particular pastor in 2006, he said he was accountable to this one. He would name all these bishop names. He would name all these pastors' names. He would bring some of them in, and he would also carbon the ministry the way those bishops and pastors would have their ministry set up. But there was no real accountability from the leadership because he continued to do and operate in such a manner that was just like, wait a minute, is this Donald Trump in 2006? No, let me stop. So, and so I think accountability is important, right?
Yes.
But in this church that I was at, the pastor had a number of people that will agree with him.
Yes.
They would walk around all tough, they sha-ta-ta-ta, they all anointed in nice suits and carrying on, but they was yes men.
Yeah. It's funny because, and I think that right there is the source of a lot of trauma in the Black church. And I'll tell you why. Because a lot of times the accountability is misplaced. So when leadership or the pastor or someone in leadership does something, it's like reversed. The church is quick to give grace and honor to that leader. But the person who is the victim, they hold the victim accountable. And you've seen that a lot in the Black church, especially with the dynamic of gender, where the preacher, the male, he can sleep around, have babies popping up out of the woodwork. And it's like, oh, well, he's just a man. Pray for him. He's weak. The devil's attacking him, But then when you see certain things that happen from the side of a woman, it's, you need to be held accountable. And you're setting a bad example. Like, whoa. Right. You don't think that in God's eyes, he don't see both the same? You think he just dropped the ball on one and didn't pick it up on the other,
Yeah.
And so you have that a lot. Like even with like John Gray's in that situation when he had cheated and stuff like that, right? It was interesting to see how everybody in the church was getting on the mistress. But I'm like, okay, but John is not a baby. John is, and I'm not saying don't forgive. I'm saying he's not a baby. I'm saying he's the one that's on the pulpit, not her. So hold everybody accountable accordingly, because we're not supposed to be respecter of persons. We all have to bear our cross. We all have to make sure we're walking in the spirit. We all have to make sure that we are fighting those things, those different lusts that the Bible already said. We each have our own lust. Okay, it's there. It's just we're equipped to handle those things. But when it comes to accountability, we have it real mixed up in the church, real backwards. And then when we let that happen, eventually God has to step in. But unfortunately, a lot of people get hurt. A lot of carnage, people get scattered, and then they end up leaving the faith.
Yeah, and in terms of accountability, I think most important, at least what I have learned, is that, in certain situations, people or leaders, and there are some great leaders out here. Don't get me wrong in this conversation. And those of you who are just joining this dialogue and this little brief dialogue about some of the things we're identifying in cults and cult leaders, we are not here to suggest or talk specifically about any particular topic. I think this is more important for individuals that are experiencing some of these things, because this is trauma. People are dealing with levels of trauma. I'm not here to spend a whole lot of energy talking about G. Craig Lewis, whoever, whatever. What I want to talk about, what we're talking about, is how to identify these things. Most importantly, how do we exit? How do we heal? Yeah. Because after the smoke is over and it's all said and done, there's still no excuse, right?
Yeah. And I think it's to provide an understanding of what you're experiencing, because a lot of people, when they come out, they kind of like feel ashamed. How could I fall for this? How could I be so stupid? And it's like, you have to understand that just like any other trauma, and especially church trauma, even your brain when you go through trauma, it rewires into a certain way where you become more hypersensitive to certain things. You process things differently. So this isn't just like, you know, just some love tap that you just experienced. This is real trauma. And when you are in even when it comes to like regular cults, you don't realize you've been programmed. And usually when you're coming out, you have to be deprogrammed. So it's not easy, you know.
So we had this conversation the other day, and I wanted you to kind of talk about some of the research and some of the study that you've been doing. And as you kind of gather what you have, I'm going through the questions, and I see Mr. Mike Andrew. Mr. Andrew says, sad that this is what's going on behind the scenes, the truth behind minute.
The name that shall not be named, skip over. I'm joking. Go ahead.
Yeah. Again, you know, I appreciate everybody's level of engagement in this conversation. This is just a conversation. And I want to make sure that we leave here with something that's going to sustain us. Because again, this is a different flow. I have with me Miss Brenda Carter, who will soon be Miss Dr. Brenda Carter. And we're talking about the trauma, the psychology of a cult. This will be our part 1 series. Then we'll go on and talk about how to exit some of these things. And then most importantly, how to heal. We're not here to spend a whole lot of time going back and forth and rehashing anything that you have known in Facebook and social media news. We want to make sure we help some people who really need some help. So I apologize that I'm not exercising this platform to skull drag Caesar.
Mortal Kombat.
We'll get Caesar later. Okay, Miss Brenda, let's talk about it. I'm going to go here and I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go to what you have prepared. Let's talk about this information right here.
Right here. All right. So this is just some things that, you know, research. It's just been common in terms of understanding your susceptibility. And I think that this is an important conversation to have, especially with dealing with the Black church, because we feel like, you know, like you said earlier, because we're not attending something where, you know, they wear the skirts all the way down and they look like they're Amish and, you know, or we don't see the hippies drinking Kool-Aid, that, oh, we're not in a cult. And you got to understand that cults can come in many different forms. And as soon as any group begins to take away your right to independently think, your right to hang out with other people, to have different thoughts, to have opposing views, you are in a cult. So a lot of people want to know, and they're trying to understand, like, how did I get caught up in this? Especially when they come out, because there's so much shame and they're still trying to make sense of everything, right? Exactly. So the first thing is that cults, they have a tendency to provide shelter from uncertainty, right? So you're in a time period, or you may have, like I mentioned earlier, a natural disposition based off of some early childhood experiences where you are more susceptible to cults, where you're more vulnerable. And a lot of times, like from an external standpoint, this happens during times of change, upheaval, emotional unrest. Maybe you've gone through some stuff in your family. Maybe you're a young family that's just getting on your feet, trying to come away from your parents who may be too controlling, or maybe trying to dictate what goes on in your marriage. So there's a lot of emotional upheaval, a lot of uncertainty, maybe during a recession, just a whole bunch of things that can cause this. And during those times, these cult leaders, they present themselves as having the answers, which looks like shelter. So I don't have to keep feeling, you know, this conflict I'm feeling if I just come up under this leader who says they have the solution. They say they have the answers.
Wow.
And so the subset of those is what you see underneath is just the explaining of what times of uncertainty, what that does. Like if you're in an uncertain time where, you know, you don't have a job, or you're looking for a spouse and you're trying to get answers, this is usually a time where you feel vulnerable because you have unfulfilled needs.
Okay.
So this cult leader comes and says, if you do this, this is going to get you what you want. Now, you don't necessarily understand that this cult leader is a con artist in essence, right? So he or she has a method to their madness, and you don't realize that no, they don't have what you need. God has what you need, and he'll help you get there, but this person doesn't have what you need. And so it makes you feel like you're this lost soul that needs to be found.
So let me help me understand something. Why is, most people say, well, this is not no cult. This man or woman loves the Lord. They really, really loves the Lord. You don't understand. They love the Lord. They preach truth. They preach righteousness. They preach holiness. They do all the things that the Bible says that we need to be done. How do you help people uncipher that, unfilter that way of thinking?
Well, it goes back into your personal.
And I'm talking about from a physician, from a medical standpoint,
the
way the brain is wired.
Well, so here's the thing. So when and let me just give a disclaimer, I am not a psychologist, but I do have to do study for my field of work. I'm not. Okay. But that goes back to your early childhood. If you were in a household where you didn't have one of the 5 or all of the 5 needs that a child needs to be met, it can create a thing in you called self-doubt. So now you begin to doubt your decisions, you doubt just everything, right? And so unless those feelings and that initial door opening of self-doubt, if those aren't addressed through therapy, there's specific therapies that you can go through to help address that. Cognitive behavioral therapy. If you don't go through and reconcile those accounts, then what will happen is your scales will be off, your perspective will be off. Right. So you'll deem something as being righteous when it's really not, because you doubt yourself, you doubt your knowledge, you doubt your ability to discern, you doubt your giftings, you doubt everything. So if anybody, even someone looks like they know how to quote the scripture, oh man, she knows the word.
Don't even know they clicking it, they cut and pasting and clicking it into Facebook window.
Yeah, like how do you know? When right. The Bible says you'll know every tree by the fruit that it bears, that's a process. You don't bear fruit overnight.
Right.
So even if you just watch long enough, don't watch what they say, because how do you know? Do you live with them? Right. A lot of times we see folks that preach one thing and then come to find out they're doing something behind closed doors that'll just blow your socks off. But the whole time you thought they were righteous. Who's to say? You don't know that.
DeAndre Love, have either of you ever been in a cult? And if so, what steps would you recommend to an individual struggling to escape a cult? Wow, DeAndre, you just trying to get ahead of tomorrow's show, but I guess we can talk a little bit about that. I'll start with you, Miss Brenda.
First, if a person feels like they are in it, because you have to have like some form of acknowledgement that something is off, even if you can't put your finger on it, it's acknowledgement of some sort. The next thing is reconnect with those bridges that you may have burned through that isolation, because you're going to need support. You're going to need emotional support, mental support, spiritual support. You need somebody that's going to be, at least praying you through. So reconnect, rebuild those networks again. And then I would say, because you were talking about, because cult behavior, as we're going to talk about later on, that is psychological warfare. So you may even need to talk to a professional that can help you with that. Because a lot of times we don't realize just the amount of programming that goes on. And when you come out, it's like ripping away the scab, but there's an infection underneath and you need to get to the hospital to put some antibiotics on it, so to speak. So you need to get to a professional, definitely need to get to a professional. So that way they can help reframe your thought and help you to see yourself in the right manner. So that way you don't repeat that and go and find another cult, that you end up gravitating towards.
And I don't want to suggest that every ministry or every church that may preach or teach things that you don't agree with, or there's some things that you may not like based on preferences, is considered a cult. I don't want to communicate that. We just want to lay out some experiences, some foundational things, some basic things to look out for as it relates to, you know, the subject matter at hand. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip to your next slide. You have here. I want to talk a little bit about this because I found this second slide that you have given to be very, very interesting.
Yes.
Talk about this.
Okay. So gains. Another thing that a lot of times cults will use to attract you that make you a little bit more susceptible is the perceived gain. Now, what you have to understand is that a lot of this joining of cults is not done consciously. It's not like, oh, I'm going to join a cult. You don't, if you're not even aware of it, you're not even joining for that. You are literally joining to either feel a sense of family and community, or to socialize, or to feel a sense of belonging. So you feel like I am gaining something that I did not have. It's filling a void. So, you know, like I said before, like if you're in times of transition and different things like that, you feel like, okay, I have a sense of certainty now, because there's a certain level of security that joining these cults, they give you, they provide to you, you know? And so a lot of times, like with that certainty, you'll have a leader, and oftentimes they're charismatic, and people will automatically, to the point that you just made, attribute certain things, certain characteristic traits to them that they think is being projected, but they don't really have that characteristic. So they'll say, oh man, this person really is strong, or they're really wise, or, you know, they're really deep in knowledge. And you don't understand, you projected that onto the leader. That doesn't mean the leader actually had that.
Now, this is one that's real interesting here. This sense of certainty. There is a sense of certainty that is gained when people join cults. I think you mentioned this before, did you not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on down to sense of meaning. Since they have been provided a new method of living, members follow their leaders obediently, endowing their lives with meaning and direction where none had existed before. So then there's this sense of security.
Yes, and so like with the sense of meaning, that is the opposite of when you feel lost. That lost soul. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have purpose. I was looking for meaning.
I'm looking for a husband.
Or I'm looking for a husband. Yes, because where's my purpose? It's
looking
in
for a wife. Right.
You know, so it's my purpose is in serving on the usher board, because they'll do that too. You need to be serving in ministry. Okay, did God tell me? Right. I digress. And then you have the sense of security, right? So cults conjure a feeling of security and safety, which decreases the person's feeling of individual responsibility. Because individual responsibility.
Stop right there. Stop right there. Let unpack that just a little bit from me.
Okay. So individual responsibility, that takes work, which means that you are responsible for, you know, checking stuff out to see if it holds up as true. You know, before you write somebody off, you are responsible to be like, well, wait a minute. I don't want to just be so quick to believe what somebody said about somebody else. Let me see if this person is really what they say they are. Like, you have to do the work, right? But with cults, they decrease your sense of self-responsibility, and it increases the leader's suggestibility and influence.
Wow, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
Techniques and tactics. The buyer beware. Common ground. An effective technique often used to draw followers is by having others in the group identify with them. This provides a sense of familiarity and assumed similarity. Let's talk about this.
Yeah. So it's basically like, oh, me too. Right? So maybe you'll get somewhere and they'll be talking and like, oh yeah, I experienced this at a church. Oh yeah, we did too. We did. And so what it feels like is like, man, there's a sense of belonging. Oh, they can identify with me. They know what I went through. And that's usually how they begin to recruit you in and get you to buy in, because then they'll come with that spin. Oh yeah, man, they was practicing such and such and such. And you're like, really?
Wow.
So you see how they flip it.
Love bombing, indoctrination.
And surrender. Yeah.
Will you make is there a way to make these slides available to other people? I think it's very important people can go back and look at this information. I'm not sure if they're able to read it or see the information from their phones or from their desktops, but you have put together some really, really good, solid insight.
Yeah.
The sense of security.
Yes.
Cults conjure a feeling of security and safety, which decreases the person's feeling of individual responsibility. You mentioned also, you talked a bit about the gains, and you also went into discussing, as those who are just catching up with us, is the shelter of uncertainties. People that travel, they get excited about a particular church, a particular organization. They travel, they leave their families, they pack up, and then they get to a place and they realize, whoa, wait a minute.
Reality.
I'm here. Reality kicks in, right?
Yep. And you've left everything you've known.
Right.
So you created even that much more uncertainty. And now you depend on this group. Your whole identity, your reality is this group. And so that's how it begins to go into your mind. And then when you start seeing, like, to some of the stuff that you had put up, like the punishment. So then you start to see people get punished for going contrary. And now in your mind, you're like,
No.
Right.
You know what's difficult as we look at some of this information that you're sharing. The first thing people sometimes feel, they feel a sense of self-doubt, confusion.
Yeah.
I know when I experienced 14 years ago, was a lot of anger initially. Because here it is, I think in my mind, I've worked so hard.
Yes.
I believe I did all this. I just wanted to do the will, and I wasn't trying to do this, and I was just trying to serve. And then it's a hurt and the letdown.
Yeah.
But it's really fascinating because, like you said, it's a chemical. It's almost like a real relationship. You're in a relationship with an idea, a way of thinking, a lifestyle, a system that is totally contrary to how we should operate in a church or in these types of groups and settings.
Yeah, because you got to understand all the effects that come from being in a cult. One of the major ones is that you have to realize you are experiencing psychological warfare. Okay. And so, you're systematically deprived of a sense of power, mastery, and selfhood. And so as a result, it begins to invade your real life experiences that you know to be true, your personality, your psychological makeup. And so what ends up happening is it ends up making you feel psychologically disabled.
Wow. It's good stuff. It's good stuff, Brenda. Very good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, while we get ready to wrap it up a little bit, we're only going to take about an hour of your time. We're going to come back tomorrow and talk a little more in depth about this concept, or this conversation about how to identify cults. I just really appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen, taking the time on your Facebook feed to just chime in and give your perspective. Right now, I'm going to open it up for some questions, some comments, and really, really make sure that the information that Brenda has put together, I want to make sure that it's made accessible to you so you can take the time to look at it, research it, and be encouraged. Many of you in this chat have either been in a situation, who left the situation, or either familiar with some of the things that we're talking about. Continue to really, really extend the invitation to people and encouraging them, because once you leave a cult, or once you leave a situation that resembles that kind of that control mechanism, don't believe the hype. Your life would be wonderful.
It sure will.
Don't believe the hype. Look, I said, look, when you leave, do not try to be a Harriet Tubman. I got to deliver these people. They got to be set free.
Yeah,
oh, they got to get set free. And that's the wrong thing to do. Grab your family, grab your horse, grab your Toyota, and grab your sandwich and leave.
Yeah.
Leave. And don't look back.
Because it's a whole process just getting to a point of mentally leaving.
Yeah.
Even if you physically leave, it's still here.
Yeah. Because, here's the thing. You want to go back and try to, come on. And everybody is still plugged into the system.
It's like when you're on a plane, right? And they drop down the face mask. They tell you, put your face mask on first, then help, your kids or whatever. Yeah. It's kind of like the same thing. You can't help anybody else if you ain't fully free.
Mm-hmm. No, and then what happens with the leadership in certain situations, they're watching you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so what happens is individual may leave if they are in some type of position or whatever. They'll go back and start killing your influence.
Oh, of course. I know that firsthand.
They done gone back to hip hop.
Right.
They got Jezebels, or right. You don't go, and so before you know it, they are waiting for your exit strategy. So when you exit,
it's already.
I gotta tell y'all, and they looking at you like South Park characters, eyes closed, just blinking their eyes, like.
And the leaders, oftentimes, they already see it coming. So it's just a method. It's an approach, and it works.
Yeah. Well, listen, I really appreciate this conversation, man. If there's any additional things that you want to share as it relates to the information that you share, because of course we didn't go into everything.
Right.
I want to manage our time and make sure that we're not exceeding our time.
Yeah.
We can always come back, double back with that information. But there's some things you want to share. Feel free. You have a call to action. You got a few minutes. Go ahead and knock it out.
I would just definitely say, please get back in your own personal relationship with God. Trust that you have the ability to build that, because that's going to be crucial and key for your own deliverance. Because he'll lead you. He'll definitely lead you. I know for me, when me and Bobby came out, that's what we had. We had to have that season where we just rebuilt our relationship, just separate from anybody else's voice. We had to build our own relationship, and that takes time. Relationships with folks that maybe we came down hard upon, back when, we was doing practicing elitism, so to speak. So that's what I would say. Is that, and also to just know that you're not alone, you're not by yourself, and it's going to be okay. It's just a process. Everybody goes through something, just like when you're in high school, you might have went through your little thing or whatever, and there's help. You're not alone. You're not, it's not the end of the world. There is life after, and it's great.
What do you say to individuals now? There are a couple of elephants in the room. And you and I and Bobby, we share some dear experiences. How do you encourage those individuals? There may be people on this conversation that, hey, anonymously just listening or watching. They're dealing with a lot of fear.
Yep.
They've made great sacrifices to come to a place expecting the great move of God, and there are things that just didn't work out. How do you encourage those families, those women? How do you get them? What does the detoxing period really look like?
Well, first and foremost, like I said, you have to be honest with yourself to say that I am in this toxic situation, right? But the other thing I would say is don't blame yourself, because that's not you've already felt enough condemnation, right? You don't need to add to that. You need to understand that it happens. Okay, now let's get the help. Build that support system. You know what I'm saying? Reach out. If you know somebody that got free, reach out. Don't reach out to people that you already that have that same mindset. Reach out to somebody that you can just talk to, that can help you sort through the mental clutter, the emotional clutter, right? And then you also need to understand, and you might have to say this in your head, but what they told me is a lie. Because a lot of times they tell you stuff that makes you feel devalued.
Yeah.
Oh, if I go back to work, I'm devalued. No, you're not. No, you're not. If I do this, I'm bad. No, you're not. Show me in the word specifically, not with their voice, not with their twisting of the scripture. I want you, with your own original thought, to go back to the word, and I want you to show me where. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, Brenda, I really appreciate you as my guest of this random pop-up live, what we call it, right? I just appreciate it, man. I think these conversations are much necessary, and just talking about these things. Neither nor or I are subject matter experts, but I am experienced expert, have experienced some things. And I really, really believe that sharing our experiences, most importantly, those things that are dear to us, and that is family, you have to protect that. You know, I think what happens is when you get involved into these situations, it's like a relationship. There are soul ties. You're plugged into the idea of this particular organization. It is your ultimate food source. Anytime a man tells you that you don't listen to nobody else but me and threaten to put you out, and it's all a kiki ha ha. No, it's not really a kiki ha ha.
Right, it's not. Pay attention.
You know, you got to be well aware. What does a loving environment really looks like? What does it feel like? Right. You know, of course, you're going to have cliques. You're going to have people that are going to join together and become friends and socialize together. But I would be very cautious of individuals that, you know, will spend a lot of time talking about other people, controlling how you live your life. And it, like I said, it's not done. What is it? Overt.
No, it's very subtle.
Very subtle.
Very subtle. And that's what you have to watch out for. It's the undercurrent. Everybody's looking for the wave. You got to watch the undercurrent.
And then what happens when you start seeing the things happen? You kind of, no, that can't be.
No, that it can. Don't turn the blind.
No, that can't be.
Don't look away.
No, God sent me here. And then you realize that, you know what, my time is up.
Right.
So we'll continue this conversation tomorrow. I think there's a lot that we did not cover. There's a lot of things that we want to continue to talk about, because I think it's important that people understand that it's okay to leave.
It is. And there's life after it.
It's okay to get out of there. It's okay, you know.
Yes.
But much love to you and Bobby. You guys have a wonderful evening. I appreciate you. We just did it. We did a 1 hour conversation. Listen. If Seiko out there,
oh, I'm sure he is.
Tell him. This is how you do it, my brother. 1 hour.
You gonna leave him alone?
Oh man. So there's no more questions. There's no more any questions out there. We're gonna go ahead and shut it down. We're gonna wish you all a wonderful evening.
Yes.
Any comments?
Appreciate you.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm gonna go back to Mike. Oh, there you go. There you go. There you go. There you go. Look at him. Oh man.
Don't do it.
Well, you ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow. We'll be talking about part 2, and just really, really digging deeply into this conversation to make sure that we're all clear that run, Forrest, run.
Good night, y'all.